Welcome everyone to Wikicliki, debating in conversation with Shabbir Hussain Mustafa, a program for SAM exhibition Wikicliki, collecting habits on an earth filled with smartphones. So please note that we'll be recording this talk in both audio and video format. We will be publishing this talk on SAM social media platforms such as Facebook and YouTube. By joining this virtual meet, you have consented to your name, audio, and/or video to be recorded. So please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the entirety of the talk. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function in Zoom by typing it down. We will be compiling all questions for the Q&A section at the end of the talk. So over to you, Mustafa and Debbie.
Thank you, Kai, and welcome everybody to this talk with 𝘠𝘪𝘵𝘩. My name is Shabbir Hussain Mustafa, and I'm a curator at the Singapore Art Museum. And we have the fun and the honor of being here today with Debbie. I thought maybe I could introduce her briefly before we get into the talk per se. So 𝘠𝘪𝘵𝘩 is a visual artist and technologist. She often in her art reworks and reappropriates formal, qualitative approaches to collecting, labeling, organizing, and then of course interpreting symbolisms of information. And the hope, of course, is to try and create alternative knowledge structure to view contemporary technology. Debbie also teaches interactive design at the Technique, and she's also a certified Unity code developer. And we'll come to that a little bit. There is a connection here. So these things kind of intersect with her art practice in fantastic ways. And I think we'll try and get at some of these questions as we move through the next hour or so.
Yes.
But just to kind of get the ball rolling, Debbie, perhaps I can ask you to speak briefly about the simulacra that is in front of us.
Yes.
And what's exactly happening.
Yes, thank you, Mustafa, for giving such a great introduction. And well, we actually originally when we talked about having this, doing this workshop, this talk, of course we wanted to do it in the real space, but we weren't able to do it. So I felt that it was very hard to talk about work if people, during this this partial lockdown, were not able to see the work. So what I have here is actually a very quick simulacra of the gallery space itself, that's currently in the gallery in the basement of the National Gallery. So I also decided to put a few items here. So instead of using slides, we could just sort of look at some of the things, and see. Well, these virtual computers are free, so I can have more of them as well. So there's a lot of there's some computers showing the different kind of works as well that are here. So we can look at it during our conversation, Mustafa. Yeah.
Sounds good. Let me just start things off. I have a very straightforward question. How does your teaching intersect with your art practice?
Yes. Well, what I teach is interaction design, which is a bit different from art. Here I produce art, and I've always said that the kind of design process informs how I make the art. So I use design processes to produce the artwork. But they're like different sides of the coin to me always. The art is a place where you find all these questions, whereas design, often there's a pressure to solve the problem immediately. We talk about the problem in the very beginning. So the thing is that sometimes there are things we cannot solve, or in that haste to solve them, we don't get a chance to explore them more. So, I feel like doing both at the same time, teaching design and also having art practice, also kind of complements each other.
Because there is this kind of burgeoning debate around current technologies, especially in terms of how contemporary artists, even such as yourself, are really bringing in kind of, or sourcing rather, different techniques and methods of working that are sort of coming from outside of the traditional contemporary art world. Right, so from the gaming industry to engineering, even the film industry in that sense. So I'm quite curious in terms of how these two aspects bridge together?
I guess I always say that sometimes people have referred to me as a digital artist, but so much of what we encounter or I encounter in the everyday world are involved with these technologies, because things on the web, things on the phone, things on tablets. So for me, and games is something that people consume in a great quantity. So and actually a lot of things like the game engines like Unity, Unreal are pretty easy to it's not the bar to entry is not that high because it's free to start up with, and a lot of the tools like the 3D modeling tools I used to make this gallery space and the blocks that were used in that shelf over there you see, and the chair, all these were made in Blender. So a lot of this is actually also a free program, open source program. So it's a lot of it is accessible to me. So it makes sense for me to also produce a kind of work with that as well.
Because I'm quite curious to try and connect what we are seeing on the screen at the moment with a kind of a aspect of your practice that necessarily involves walking, right? And in a way, kind of these chance encounters that happen around the city. Sometimes it's like a moment, right, waiting to reveal itself, and it only reveals itself through the act of walking and being somewhere at that very particular moment, and then having a kind of a dialogue with whatever it is that you have found. I thought maybe it'll be interesting to kind of recall some of those, a couple of those early works, right? Like say, for instance, oh yeah, I see it over there, the dream syntax, right?
Yes.
Which you once described to me as a kind of a memory palace.
Yeah. These it's funny to talk about the walking being a big part of my practice when, to be very frank, in the last year or so, last few years, I haven't really walked as much. But in the beginning, a lot of the works I made were about this kind of mapping, experiencing a city on the ground as someone walking, writing about walking. And it's almost like, from my perspective, I thought that, as a writer, because my degree was in literature. So in the beginning, I thought of myself as a writer, that I would be able to write whatever I wanted about city, and how I experience cities are also, how I know cities are also through literature, like reading books and getting a picture of what a city might look like. So I also felt that I had the chance to write it into something else, write it even from black to white if I wanted to. So, a lot of it, I also, this kind of writing and mapping. So maybe for me, trying to put them into words, and then after that, making them into visual maps was a way of kind of articulating this city, the city as well. I think as a memory palace is because I also think of it as mnemonics, like a way to remember a place, even though after the place is no longer there. Even like a dream, you have a dream and you write it down on paper, you draw a little map that's like cipher for the dream. But when you wake up, that dream doesn't exist anymore, that space doesn't exist. So there are just ways of capturing it, but yet they seem pretty important. They seem to color your whole day. So the early works were all about kind of capturing this very intangible quality of it.
Because I'm also trying to kind of maybe connect it to the computer-aided investigations, right, that you have been leading of late, and how, in a sense, walking becomes reconfigured, especially over the last year or so, when walking became almost a kind of exercise in exercise in yeah, go ahead.
I'm reopening the project at Simply. That's the top of it. Open. We're back into the game world again. Yeah. So I think I told you that since I hadn't been doing a lot of walking, also I have a very young baby. I spend a lot of time playing games and things like Second Life, or whatever little time I have left, is also spent in this kind of virtual worlds that I found very easy to develop and to sort of be able to recapture spaces. Like now we can't be in the gallery, but well, you can get a sense of what it looks like, what the size of the things are. I know like the scale that I wanted the prints to be at, that which you can see here in relation to a human scale. So this scale is something that you can still experience by walking around in this gallery, in this virtual gallery.
So before we turn to the specifics of the two big works, right, that are presented in the Wikicliki exhibition, I wanted to maybe also get you to reflect a little bit on another aspect that is really very much connected to your work, which is, I think it's called version control,
Yeah.
or sort of optimizing the world as time shifts, and we attempt to escape time
Yeah.
as well. Because, and the reason why I asked this is sort of connected to something that the exhibition, the Wikicliki exhibition, attempts to unravel as well.
Yeah.
And this is essentially that, you know, conventions, museological conventions, if I may call them that, when it comes to painting and sculpture, and even to some extent installations, has been established, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does one conserve it? How does one preserve it? How does one present it? Right? There is a market for it. You know, how do these things circulate, change hands, provenance, so on and so forth. But when it comes to some of the works, right, even works such as yours, with regards to contemporary technologies, it's not so self-evident, I feel, especially at this moment in time. And institutions and even the art market to some extent is trying to figure this out, right? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this, but in relation to version control and how this interacts with these questions.
Yeah, I mean, with some of the works I've made, you know, even though a lot of the works I've made in the past have been about archiving, like you can see the work over there, Here the River Lies, is really about archiving all these stories. So, you know, I've worked on projects like the Substations, the 25th anniversary, which, you know, it's kind of an archive, so going through its archives and trying to think of the fate of all these kind of things as well. Even for me, keeping all the code together has been surprisingly hard. You know, I thought I would have all of it together, but even when we were talking about this and I looked at some of the older works that I made, these touch tables that I had made, and kind of Kinet interactives that I made in 2010 and 2011, I actually realized I don't really have the code for them anymore. I don't know where the code is. It's probably on a hard drive somewhere that I don't know where it is anymore. And even then, the technology used to do it is quite different. You know, like that was built in Flex in ActionScript 3. Flash is totally dead today. So, you know, what happens to all these interactive works as well, you know? I even for someone who was quite kind of thinking about the archive, thinking about archiving, it was also very hard to hold on to. I think I put this hard drive here because I had worked on where I did my master's with Royal College of Art, and my program Design Interactions was quite a well-known program that ran for 10 years, and I was from the last batch. And I actually have a hard drive of some of the materials that were kind of collected at the very end, and it contained like all the items for 10 years and even before that. And they had people it was the archive of a lot of student work over the years from 95, even before it was called that program's name. And some of the files were made on Mac OS versions that don't even exist today. So you have to get the emulator to just access the file. Or they were made in such tiny resolutions that they were like, I don't know, 600 by 400 something pixel. They were so tiny. So then it kind of archive of the how do you even show that archive is really difficult. How do you access it? And I think that's one of the things that I've often struggled with, because also as I made a program, you can see this is the same program and I made it in 2 different versions. So there were like so many versions of this, and along the way I seem to have lost the originals, which is the original and the code base for it as well. And some of the works here as well, I present them in so many different ways. I've presented this you know, the large prints on the wall here in many different sizes, in different colors, and so, you know, sometimes when I'm asked to say, put down the manual of what this work will be like in the future forever, you know, like what is this work, how do I define the work, the contract, the kind of contract or manual for documentation of the work, if I want to pass it to someone to show it, it's hard for me to say what is the final thing. Yeah.
It's quite a fascinating question, I think, because I mean, if I may say, Debbie, you know, you could theoretically keep working on your older works and constantly kind of upgrading them, right? over the years. So the real question is, right? Do you spend time developing new works, or are you constantly in the process of just updating things as they grow, right?
That's hard. Yeah. I try not to. Obviously, my goal as an artist is to make new things, not to get caught up in this. Try to. It's almost like having to have a cut-off point for some works. It's not very clear, I think, for artists like maybe myself. I find it hard to actually have a cut-off point to say this is when the work has reached its final form. In fact, maybe it never reaches its final form. Some of the things will never reach their final form, or will always be sort of in progress.
I mean, the Wikicliki work, right, which is essentially a wiki that you maintained since 2008, is a great example of this. But we'll come to that in a little bit. I wanted to try and maybe pick up on Here the River Lies, right? A work that really also begins around 2008, just after you graduated from NUS. And you're doing quite a bit of walking and thinking. Could you just talk a little bit about how it came about, and what were the impulses for the work itself?
The Here the River Lies and the works about the river, actually I would say they start from a very simple question. When I ask people about the Singapore River, I realized they didn't really know where it was sometimes. I worked on a building, which is actually somewhere in this map in the past. In fact, I worked in 2 buildings. I was working in advertising at the time, and I spent a long time walking about the river because it's kind of like a central point that you pass through a lot. When I basically I had to pick up a design brief at the other side of the river every single day, and I walked back to my office building. It's a very strange way of picking up. But then every day I would walk through it, and then when I talk to people about it, friends or colleagues and people around it, not everybody seems to know or even care that it's a geographical feature. It's a bit like a road that is, people might just dig up and sort of change. And, I was used to the idea of thinking that a river, you see in the UK, because I also worked for some years in the UK, and over there, I think we say the River Thames, everybody knows what the River Thames looks like, because they see it in everything, they see it in pictures, and the Singapore River is something that instead people don't seem to have much of a picture of, and so I ended up making a series of works about the river, and I was interested also in maybe in a way sometimes I felt like the stories were quite mundane about it, so I wanted to have an opportunity to collect the stories from people, the ones that were also quite it didn't have to be real, a bit like a dream, you can't really say is it not a valid story because you can't verify the details. I think around that time there was a lot of this Singapore Memory Project and things like that, and I think these memory projects, some of them were very earnest. They were very, I wouldn't say earnest in a way that I maybe didn't like so much, because they sort of were looking, people were looking for good memories, good stories, and these good stories sometimes precluded the bad, by bad, like bad memories, like either the ones that you can't really say, am I right? Or the stories that were just bad, like, oh, it was really bad. I'm not going to tell you my bad story. Why am I going to tell you the worst time in my life? Why would I recount it for you and relive that trauma? So, I felt that was I being someone who likes stories, I wanted to collect from people, and this map was one way that I did it. At the point, you probably noticed that although I have all these computers in the far distance and kind of digital stuff, I felt like I had to collect it in person, and making a website never really collects the thing, because you lose all that marginalia, all the things that people would draw and write on the side as well of say a book or a paper, and this sort of captures also it in a much more different way from having to if I ask you to fill out a form, it wouldn't be the same sense, and the fact that the entries are physical, they sort of bump up in the real gallery space. The entries are all randomly arranged, and then they sort of juxtapose upon one another, where you read a few cards that are randomly arranged, and then you almost piece together the story together in your own mind. Yeah.
And actually this moment around 2008, 2009 leads to a series of works on the Singapore River, right? Obviously there was the Pulau Saigon project, and then there was so could you talk a little bit about that as well? But before Pulau Saigon, perhaps Debbie, what we see here on the screen,
Yeah.
because recently you started transcribing
Yes.
the stories, right? In a Google spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So recently, I also got my I got my husband George to help me transcribe them, and which he also I think when I went through it also, I physically went through all 1,500 cards, and he also went through it to help transcribe it. And there are lots of story. There are some stories that are interesting and they sort of capture the essence of what I hoped for. That kind of half fantasy, half poetic, half something a bit weird, about it. But then there were also a lot of very mundane. They were actually overwhelmingly, a lot of it was pretty mundane as well. A lot of stories were, and my husband said it was pretty alienating for him to transcribe this work in the end, because some of the stories there were just so, almost irrelevant. It was a chance to cast it into like a time capsule, in a way. But the things that were written down were, some were interesting, and then some were just very, I was here. That's it. There was nothing else to it. Yeah.
Yeah, a kind of a confabulation, no, of sorts.
Yeah, some confabulations. Yeah, some and there were also certain things that kept coming up, like the Loch Ness monster, and everyone's like, it must be so unique to talk. And then there's so many Loch Ness monsters and kaiju things, that kept coming up. Yeah. So yeah, but I felt like I probably would have gotten the most exciting stuff if I had done it entirely digitally, because then if you have any forms that you ever did online, having to, this data is kind of like a very small data set anyway, but it's like collecting in person kind of makes it a bit different as well.
I think some time ago, as George was transcribing it, you described the process as being representative of boring data, right?
Yeah. Kind of really boring. But I think a lot of data is, unless you go and really dig through it and actually clean up the data. So a lot of data can't really be used. And I think when we talk about big data, this isn't big data. This is like really, really small. This is like only 1,500 units of entry points, and there were so many glitches in it. And for me, actually, the glitches or the bad parts of it are the parts that are more interesting. And also, it takes also somebody, a human, to go and look at the data and figure out what's interesting out of it. It's not like something that we could just like find a machine process and make it interesting. No, there's no such thing. There's a human who has to go and find out what is really good in it. Yeah.
I want to try and kind of use that as a way to connect to the Pulau Saigon project, right? Because on the one hand, it is based on a physical site, a site that you kind of discover through Here the River Lies, right?
Yes.
But then it also kind of, the work acts as a sort of a segue, into some of your more ongoing interests, if I may describe that, especially with the use of technologies. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So when I began the library of Pulau Saigon, it actually happened because there was a card in one of the entries, and the entry was writing about how basically somebody was actually working on a kind of an archaeology dig at Pulau Saigon. At that point, I didn't even know it was a real site or something even. So it could have been, for me, even a fake story, to be honest. But then when I had gotten the chance to show my these touch table works that were here, I got a chance to show it at Art Science, which is this picture here. I got a chance to show it there, and on the other side of the room from it, there were the real objects being exhibited. There had been a small loan of the item from Pulau Saigon at in the Art Science Museum next to this work, loaned by, I think, John Mixie at the time. He had loaned it to let them show it, and this was outside the Titanic show. So the Titanic show was a blockbuster show, super shiny, gigantic, tours the whole world. The sound, the smell, design, everything was like that. And then at the end, there was a small gallery full of things of Singapore at that time period. kind of historically related artworks and kind of historical objects. And there were real objects in Pulau Saigon there, but when I saw them, I felt like this was, it was kind of being overwhelmed by the hugeness of the Titanic show, and also the fact that these stories were maybe not as dramatic. They were not so, the objects themselves were very small, and they look very, and the descriptions of them were pretty mundane. They were kind of boring items, like spoon, belt buckle, or something like a child might throw into the river by accident walking on the way to school or something, so completely mundane. And it was the mundane, the sheer mundaneness of it that drew me to them, and I wanted to recreate it or bring it to life, since Pulau Saigon's island today didn't really exist, and the whole geographical feature of the island that used to be the Singapore River actually doesn't exist. So if you see there in the map, there are some of these islets in the middle, and one of them is Pulau Saigon.
Yeah.
But then I thought I might write a story. In fact, I drafted it as a book in the beginning. I started writing these short stories, but somehow that felt wrong. Like I didn't really know the story itself. So I thought instead, why not take an artifact from that world or parallel reality or alternate reality and bring it into that world, bring it into our world instead. So to kind of figure out what the objects themselves from Pulau Saigon would look like, and to print them out, and find a process for automating it, kind of scripting it, a scripted way of producing them as 3D objects that could be printed, since that was possible already, and within a consumer range price as well, all these 3D printing. So, what I did was in the end produce this library of objects. They sit there and people can actually hold them. They're kind of scaled to our world size as well. So they're like hand size. They're not meant to be, whatever they were, whether they were an oar for a boat or or a spoon, they were the same size. They are the hand size, about like 7.5 to 8.5 cm long. So they are on the scale that we relate to, but of course not necessarily their original scale anymore, but something that people are forced to have to look at it and say, what on earth is this? Is it my dog's frisbee? What? But it's actually an object from Pulau Saigon.
Fantastic. I'm thinking maybe we should kind of shift a little bit here at this point, because I have a lot of questions. I mean, later on you go on to use laser cutting, and then there's of course the space geodes work and so on and so forth. So obviously this the Pulau Saigon work is quite formative, right?
Yes.
In that regard, and this is around 2012, 2013, right?
Yes.
And I think one maybe important remark, if I may characterize it as such, a lot of your projects take a number of years to put together, right? I mean, it's
Yes.
I think even though it says 2015 over there.
No, that's the sort of year of completion that I might call it. Although it started much earlier. Maybe I would say even the beginning work for it, you could even say it started in 2011. Yeah. So they take a long time to become a work, and they also go through many forms of the work.
Because this is sort of perhaps connected in an interesting way to a kind of a formation that you initiated and ran, perhaps even an attempt at some kind of measured anonymity, which was called the Singapore Psychogeographical Society in the early days, right? I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think this connects quite interestingly to the second work that we want to go into in a little bit, which is the rules for the expression of architectural desires. But I think maybe we should talk a little bit about Singapore Psychogeographical Society.
Yeah, it was I used this term to produce a number of works and also writings. I think I have to say, maybe it was in the early years, it was a bit naive for me to think that giving myself a kind of name like this gave me a kind of neutrality when I wrote. But that was literally what I thought when I did that. But of course, the works that I produced, over time I realized that people saw for example, I had these I had about 600 prints of these survey markers, and the survey markers, I had put my feet in them merely for scale. In my mind, I thought I only put them in for scale, but people were actually looking at the feet and saying, that's a person, that's the person who made them instead. So they focused a lot on that, and for me, it's not actually what I imagined when I made it. I wanted to just have a scale because my feet were consistently the same size. So I thought that would be the marker for which I could measure scale. But there is no real, there's no way to be truly neutral. But I guess in a way also you could, I mean, I remember we talked about this as well, that how also other artists also had come up with these almost institutional sounding names, like societies, other kind of institutes,
like
this kind of,
Robert Chow's Institute of Critical Zoologists, right? Which happens almost at the same time as you're initiating this project.
Yeah. So these were, I mean, for me, it was a way of producing something. I thought it was going to be more anonymous, but over time, I realized that the stamp of me as a maker is really in all the works. It's very hard to say it comes from a totally neutral point of view.
So the Singapore Psychogeographical Society does not exist anymore?
I haven't produced work under this name, although I used to say that when I did all these lectures, that anybody who had attended was automatically considered a member, that and anyone would be considered a member by attending the lectures.
Which kind of I think segs very nicely into rules, right? Or I mean, short form for rules of rules for the expression of architectural desires, which in a way materializes around 2014 when you're in Berlin. And before you talk about the work itself, I'd love to hear more about the residency program itself, right? Because it was quite unique in terms of what it was trying to achieve.
Yes. So the rules themselves, they were, I wrote these when I was on residency in ZKU, which is a Center for Kunst and Urbanistic. That is a space in a former train station in 𝘍𝘬𝘏 that has been taken over by a group who is running. Basically, the residency space is for artists, architects, people working on urban related things, even ecology related things. So anything relating to the city and art. Not strictly art alone, but also people who were just working on things about the city. And it was quite interesting environment to be in, because everybody there was the beekeepers. There were people doing different kinds of projects with food as well, and I actually went there with the intention to build something physical. I had lots of concrete and everything, and I was going to build something physical, but I'm not sure why it sort of I ended up writing. It was quite a short time as well, I suppose. I had I want to say that I'm not that great at building physical things. I actually don't come from that. I never actually studied art and all the crafty stuff and everything. I didn't really study that. I mainly was a writer, to be honest. So I had this almost like a crisis of no, I can't I can't actually build that well, to be very honest. I'm not a sculptor on that level that could sculpt something, and I ended up writing this a set of things, rules, rules for what the kind of a city. And I have been writing my thesis at the same time. Maybe that's why I ended up doing even more writing. My master's thesis was partly on an author called 𝘍𝘬𝘏, who I felt I had some maybe similar vibes with, because he was a brilliant writer, and the thing is that he was, for all the things that he couldn't build, there was a book of his that had been about it was called The Perpetual Motion Machine. So he was a writer, but he also was trying to make a side living off building what he hoped would be a successful perpetual motion machine that would earn him lots of money, and then he would be able to live off it forever. But then he couldn't. So the book became about how he imagined the world would become as well, if he built this awesome machine, which as we know is impossible to build, perpetual motion machine, but he did not know this in the 1910s. And so he he was trying to build it, and he hired these plumbers and mechanics, like handymans, DIY, part-time handymans to help him build his various contraptions that he imagined would one day solve the problem of energy, and then man could focus on things that were more, fruitful for the soul, like literature or culture or destruction of the world, and whatever that man pleases, or man's nature is to do. Yeah. So yeah, so it's
so a kind of a writer who is also an inventor of prototypes, so to speak.
Yes, so he was a inventor of a failed inventor of a not perpetual motion machine. But in the end, this notebook of all his prototypes and sketches and everything, technical drawings that have failed, he has instead writings on the side about with every failed prototype, he says, well, I'll spend a bit more time thinking about the way in the world will be I imagined it to be. Yeah, and there was another book of his that I read, The Grey Cloth and 10% White, and it's a kind of architectural fantasy written about glass architecture before there is glass architecture in the world, actually. And he imagines that an architect, there's the main character is a sort of idiosyncratic man who has set a rule for his future fiance. He says that his fiance will only get married if you wear only this color, this gray cloth forever, with 10% white. Because the way that you when you stand in my building that I've built, the light that comes in, that falls onto your dress, is complemented. So for him, everything in the world had to be subservient to the ultimate architectural fantasy or desire. It had to fulfill that. So when people asked for other things, he was perplexed why it wouldn't serve that purpose. So in a way, the rules are also about that. I guess they are also a kind of a bit like that. For me, they are my rules, that I imagine for a city where everything would be about having the most fulfilling some sort of architectural desire, maybe at the expense of other things.
After you told me about the novel, I realized that there is a curious subheading to it as well. It's called A Lady's Novel.
Yes, I know about that one. Yeah, a lady's novel. It's about a lady. Yes, it is about a lady.
But now kind of staying with rules, right? If you want to call them that. There is one particular rule in there which actually says that returning city dwellers, I think it's towards the right at the end, right?
Oh yeah.
All individuals returning back to the city must be in. Is this the one?
Yes, returning
residents must be certified.
Yes.
And in a way, sometimes we think that fiction, right, exists in the realm of fantasy, but years later, one kind of looks back and you're like, oh wow, okay, because glass becomes a very important feature, right, within modernist architecture 50 years later, right, and steel, of course, but in a sense, I think the rules on the one hand are hilarious, many of them. As well, maybe even a little whimsical at times, if I may use that expression in a productive sense, but also very much poignant. Yeah, I have a question in regards to this. Were the rules written with a particular city in mind?
No, definitely not. But I have to say that when I showed it obviously not in Singapore, everybody said, "Oh, this is what Singaporean artists would do." We know so much about Singapore and their rules. No wonder you did this. I mean, I didn't do that because I'm Singapore. But yeah, there are a lot of rules in Singapore. So perhaps I have been indoctrinated already, to think in the lines of trying to explain for the rules, that exist sometimes.
Because the two videos, right, that flank the work, they are made in one is in Berlin and the other is in Paris, I believe. Yeah?
Yes, so this one is shot in this is actually shot in Berlin, and the other one's in London.
In London,
very near my house. Yeah, my old house. In Haringey. This one is in London, in Haringey.
The question that I want to kind of ask with regards to rules is that, again, a bit like Here the River Lies, this work also has acted as a toolbox, because you have returned to it from time to time, right? And picked up on very specific aspects of it in order to kind of unravel newer works. In a sense, then the work is still growing and newer meanings are created with each staging. Yeah, it'll be interesting to talk about the camouflage.
Yeah. I suppose when I wrote these rules, I initially thought I would try to make them into physical work. In fact, like, for me, I guess because I know a lot of artists work probably by producing a visual sketch or something first. But for me, since I've always worked as a writer first, I write the thing and then I find out a way to translate it into visual work or interactive work. So I had initially thought of these rules as something that I would spend time translating slowly over the next few years into things. Although in the end, I feel that they also work in themselves as kind of these almost shouty, big rules that are, almost shouting at you in a space. But yeah, I mean, part of it, all my works are translated in a sense. They translated from one form to the other, whether they are like from a dream being translated into a map, into a book, or is it from a story that is translated into a physical artifact or sculpture. Yeah.
I have one question. The first time Rules was presented, it was in Berlin, right?
Yes.
How was it presented? Because it's quite different from what we see in the Wikicliki exhibition.
Yes, it was the videos were very large and the prints were very small. I guess even the video itself is almost an articulation of one of the rules. I don't know which one it is. Let me see whether I can find it now. One of the rules. Like these guys, yeah. The appreciation. I always thought of this like a kind of ASMR video that had where there was like a hand that sort of rubs across the whole city and appreciates all parts of it, which we don't really touch for textural qualities anymore because people already think it's very dirty, instead of actually enjoying the textural qualities of a city. So even then, so it had been printed very small, but over the years I have printed larger and larger, almost because I suppose the rules are a bit like these big billboards. I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking also about how the font is and even the way that it's printed as well. These are also things that I'm concerned with. But of course, the simplicity of them is that they are like you don't know who has set the rule, who is who by law, who is the law, who set it down.
Yeah. Staying with this question of writing, right? I think this is perhaps a kind of a mode of working, a kind of a thought space, right? Perhaps that will stay with you, if I may say, in the years to come, right? Maybe it's the literature training at NUS in the early days as well. I wonder how this will evolve in relation to your more recent interest in terms of writing code, right? And I'm also kind of observing there's a question that's just come in as well, which is sort of connected to this. So the question is, anonymous attendee says, hi Debbie, I really like your work. I'm curious which software you're using for the exhibition mock-up that we see on the screen. It's so beautiful as compared to softwares like SketchUp.
Oh, well,
yeah.
This is actually just in Unity. This is built in Unity, rendered, made into a Mac OS app. I actually wanted to make this into a WebGL app, but then I did this very last minute. I think Mustafa, I just started building it this week. It came together.
A few days ago.
Few days ago, and it was a very busy time at my work when teaching as well. So it was very. This is put together in surprisingly a small amount of time. This is made in Blender, which is very powerful, and everything's done here in Blender. The things are modeled in Blender before they're brought over, and then they are, it's if you're using SketchUp, you probably use a render engine like V-Ray to render it to get the same quality or effect. But in the game engine, this is all live, so all the lighting is live. So a lot of the materials and shaders have to be made in Unity to fit the program, to fit your whatever you want. So there are in terms of coding, I want to say I'm not really a great coder. In fact, I would say I'm not even a full stack. I'm not full stack. I would only describe myself as a front end kind of developer who can do just enough to do the things I want to do. I'm still learning. There's a lot of things that I need to learn, but I have attempted it because I feel like some part of it is also like translation into a different language, trying to translate an idea. And if I don't know how to code, I can't actually engage with this material. I can't actually build on this material. I can't build a game. Then I can't actually talk about making interactive works like this at all, because so much of it is down to that, being able to control the medium. So I have to have that understanding, even if I'm not the world a pro, professional full-time coder.
Yeah, because there is something that we do have planned as part of the exhibition is to think about a more recent work, The Legend of Debbie.
Yes.
Right, which we will try and unravel in the coming weeks as well, which kind of also sense relates to what we are seeing on the screen at the moment. One more question based on the question that was put forward by a member of the public. The background to this image, the Mars like
it is a Mars picture from NASA. It's just from the photos. It's a skybox with NASA's images. Yeah.
Let's picking up on that question of code, right? As a form of writing, as well. I thought perhaps we could move into the last section of our talk, which is on Wikicliki itself. I think for those in attendance today, just a quick background to this. The exhibition is actually named after this work. But interestingly, the artwork itself does not appear in the exhibition in a more formal presentation format. And this is really what we were trying to think of as a curatorium as well, with artists like Debbie and the other participating artists, in terms of what it means, right, to collect. What does it mean to engage with collecting habits at a time when smartphones and contemporary technologies are so pervasive in our everyday lives, right? I mean, they determine so much, but at the same time have kind of really altered the way we think and feel about the world as well. Some even for the worse, right? As we are discovering with regards to the web space and so on and so forth. But I thought Wikicliki in that sense is a great site for exploring some of these questions. And Debbie, I know we've talked quite a bit about this work, and I thought, could you just introduce the work, what it is, right? And then we'll get into some of the more details, some of the other details. There's all this kind of ongoing rage about blockchains and NFTs and so on and so forth. But we'll come to that.
Yeah. So the wiki, as you can see here, is a website that I've maintained since 2008, which you could actually say, if you were to describe it by its technical components, then it's basically a customized version of a media wiki, which is similar to Wikipedia. What Wikipedia runs on is a Wikipedia. The software is free to run on your own server. It runs on PHP, and you can customize it to the way you want. And what I've done is I've been building it over the last few years, over the more than 10 years on my own. So technically, as an object, this is you could say that it's a customized copy of a software that I've made here. But of course, all the same, is more than just software than the software that I've customized here. It's more than just a piece of software on this website. It's a bit like an artist notebook, I guess you could say, because I have maybe I've just kept too many. It's kind of weird because when Mustafa asked me about this as a work, I hadn't really thought of it as a work. It's kind of like source material for me as well, you know, where I have been putting all my notes, sometimes a bit personal, so they're all in there. But it's kind of like there was this idea of this cult of done. Like once you finish it, you publish it on the internet, even if it's not done, it is considered done now. So you can mentally close it off and move on to the next project. So I treated the wiki a bit like that, you know, where I publish things and notes, and once I have set it down, I can move on. But also I can search it. It's like my second brain. If I don't know what I've forgotten what I thought about something, I can search it back in my wiki, you know, from a few years later, and then realize that what I had thought about was totally different. So that's always been really interesting. And the way I like it is that also when I'm just refreshing it. So, you know, when I actually scroll through it, there are lots of things that I just randomly happen to put next to each other. And the IDs sort of smoosh up, you know, like when you go to a library and you pick off different books from a bookshelf, the ones that just happen to be next to each other sometimes talk to one another. And there are these unexpected connections that are made between the different entries for me. So that's actually the wiki. I made it also in an attempt to learn coding in the beginning, because I used it to keep all my snippets, and they're pretty handy for that. So nothing is ever really lost, except I do lose source codes too. As you said at the beginning, you know, it's possible to lose you, but you know, at least it helped me learn and refer back to things. Over years, yeah.
So is it a bit like, I mean, just going back to your to some of the earlier points, right, that we raised, especially with regards to prototyping. I mean, is it fair to say that it's a prototype that is never finished?
Yeah, so you could even say that I could conceivably continue editing this while I'm alive, so it will never be completed unless I'm dead. You know, yeah. And I mean, the point at which an artist decides that the work is resolved, it sometimes feels very arbitrary as well. You know, whereas if I were dead, that would be a definite milestone. You know. Yeah.
Okay, so this is where I think we should really talk about how, say, a work such as this, right, could potentially be minted as an NFT, right? And all the questions that potentially emerge as a result of that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, could this be actualized?
Well, that's the thing. I suppose the point is that previously, if I told you I was going to sell you a my customized wiki code and its contents, I would probably have made a weird cardboard box and said, this is the wiki, this is the contract for the code wiki. And that's what people do, I guess, artists do. And that feels so weird because it's so analog and so problematic to do it that way, you know, like the whole process of it. How do you know that's the real thing, you know? And the whole point of the smart contract would be to provide that authenticity, to say, even though the thing's public on the internet, everybody could access it. This is the authentic version. You have an authentic version of it here. But then it still has the problem that the wiki has many versions. Like now, this is the version it is as of today, which is 29 May at 1:53 p.m. You know, this would be the version of it now. But then, if you were to have it tomorrow, that would be a different. Would that be another version? Would that be a new version that could be minted as a separate one? So how do you define that contract for what entails a digital work? Yeah.
So what is the conundrum here? The conundrum is it about how we go about visualizing the blockchain itself?
No, I think it's more to do with it's mint kind of an NFT. The thing about it is that it would say that this was the authentic version of itself. You know, the authentic unit of it, and it didn't matter if you could provide a link to say, you know, that this is the authentic version, or the files, you know, could be, some of it could be also put in. Well, if it's very big, it couldn't be put into the contract, but you know that no one else could own it, even though it's public on the internet. Yeah. Yeah.
A kind of a related question to this is there is a question that has come in but it pertains to Here the River Lies. So I thought perhaps we should really wrap up with Wikicliki, then go into the questions. But yes, for everybody who's here, please start posting your questions so that we can make our way through them very systematically. Just a quick question about this whole kind of exploration, right, of potentially minting Wikicliki as an NFT. I think NFTs themselves are also ridden with all sorts of hierarchies, right? It's not as democratic as they are being made out to be. Obviously, there's
a cost. There's a cost, and there is also the ecological cost of it also. That, you know, when you and that also in terms of when now you see a lot of people selling NFTs, there are marketplaces, but these marketplaces are kind of weird because, well, for me, is that in order to get into these marketplaces, there are still certain gatekeepers and bars to entry as well. So it is not fully that dream. Although I think the technology itself, you know, in terms of the having the capability to do the smart contract, that would be the special thing about it. Yeah.
There is a quick question that has come in. One is with regards to Here the River Lies.
Yes.
So the question here is that in Here the River Lies, part of the work features participants' comments. If time permits, which is of course yes, how did you plan the participants' work as part of your art in the final presentation set? So basically, how did you plan the participants' contributions, if I understand it correctly, as part of your art?
How I chose to show it?
Yeah.
Well, it is the filter is myself. I am the human filter who has sorted it because these are physical cards. If they had been, I also tried to categorize them as well, but they're also filtered through myself in that way. They're all given the tag by myself. So they are not that. I mean, because now that I've shown it a number of times and tried to experiment the way of showing it, I've come to terms with the fact that there is going to be this reading that I have made of it, and it's my choice to put it in a certain way. It is not like say a machine has chosen the most efficient way to do it, but rather I, with my biases and everything, has chosen it to do it this way. So in terms of the practicality of it, we've always shown a number of the cards on the table on this map itself, and in this showing in Wikicliki, I really wanted to be able to show more of them. So this design of this cabinet was also made so that more of the stories, the interesting stories, could actually be shown, because I think that's a big part of it. I wanted people to come back to see them as well over time, to visit it over and over again, to look at different stories that accumulated.
I have another question that's come in, which is, would Sam acquire Wikicliki as an NFT? I think maybe, I mean, I can try and answer that. Yes, certainly we can explore it for the collection, but how, right?
How will you show it? So what would that kind of work? How do you, I mean, there may be very practical ways to say it, but of course, who comes up with these ways of showing a thing? Like now I've decided, you know, what is this? Is this even a work? Are we standing in a work now? You know, this game, which is a Mac OS native app. You know, what is this? So the Legend, you know, the other project I'm working on, is a game also. It's also a game that exists in a few versions. There's the Mac OS, the Mac version of it, the Windows version of it. Could there be a WebGL or an Android app? You know, so all there are different versions of themselves as well. So which one is the one as well? Yeah.
And how do we sustain it, right, as well?
Yeah. Or showing it over a few years, like I just mentioned about the hard drive issue. Like if you have a digital work, you know, maybe one can formulate a whole comprehensive way of a catch-all for all the things in the world. But that would be I guess that's why there are all these different web standards and ways of making things so that the files that you make today are still accessible tomorrow.
Oh, this is a fun question. Let's just come in. I'm wondering if you will have different sets of rules for different cities and for Mars as well.
For Mars. Mars has no cities. Does Mars have any Mars city? Maybe if there is a Mars city. I mean, I only say because I look over there at Mars and it's not really a city. And I guess, the world is also not just the places with cities. Yeah. I think in the beginning when I wrote this, I always said it was not about any one city. Obviously, there are colors and snippets of cities I've been to, definitely, that are in them. But it would be nice if they could be a story for any city, Yeah. Yeah. I guess I make works about city only because I've only mainly lived in cities in my life. I've not really lived in the countryside, so it is definitely a reflection of where I am as well, and in my life. Yeah.
I wanted to maybe quickly go back to a work that I think we didn't really discuss enough, which is on the table, which is A Home Without a Shelter.
Okay, yes.
Debbie, I'm thinking, could you talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so this was one of the works I had made for the President Young Talent Show that was part of Soilworks. So actually, I had tried to build it in many different forms. It was a pair, almost like a pair with the shelter that I had made. So they were kind of shelters, a whole bunch of shelters. They were kind of like the shelter being, the word called shelter being a bomb shelter that had been built in the National Museum during the Singapore Biennale 2016. And this one being the poncho-like shelter in a way, where was a kind of an articulation of that story that I had written, imagining that well, when I made it, all the works in Soilworks were meant to be a bit like landscapes, but landscapes in not a landscape painting format. When we often say landscape, it turns out to be a landscape painting, but all these are meant to be different sorts of landscapes. In that show, I had different things and objects and kind of materials. They were like a bit like deconstructed versions of landscapes, all of them. And this one being a kind of a ridiculous ghillie suit with a grass on top. Yeah, that was the kind of soil-covered suits that were also articulation of this story. That was about how a lot of spaces in public, you're not allowed to sit on them if they're private, or you get chased away because they are part of a kind of a private space, but they're also a public space because they're of their location in a sense. So this Soilworks was a series of kind of landscapes that were not kind of weird landscapes that I was trying to build. Yeah.
I think one last question. It's a big one. Just come in separately, but are we at that point whereby there will be a break such that the blockchain will lead to a separation from the art world as currently understood and chart its own autonomous path with its own markets, its own art history, its own institutions, and its own gatekeepers? It's a question.
That's an interesting question. I think is that hope? Is that what one hopes for? As well, because I guess I always wonder. There's always this question as an individual artist. What is the art market? Who is the art market? Where is the art market? What is there even an art market? Sometimes for an artist like myself who hasn't really worked with commercial galleries before, and who hasn't been really working commercial in that sense, and I mainly have been working with institutions. So when you ask me what is the art market, I find it quite hard to think of. Then to think of any the kind of NFTs, then I would also wonder who exactly is that buyer. It's probably a very different individual already to begin with, and who they, what is their motivation for collecting the art is probably also a different way, a completely different thing. So yeah, I imagine it could be, but I mean, at this point, it's still really early to say. But I would be very happy if there's a way, that one finds that it produces a separate system of its own. Yeah. But one that improves on the way things are, that are not, that does not only privilege those who are already, already privileged. No, it doesn't have any of those kind of systemic injustices that also occur. Like we just talk about gatekeepers of different systems. Yeah.
Thank you, Debbie. It's been wonderful. We can see you sort of.
Yes.
I know your daughter joined us as well.
Yes, Vino has joined me. That's why there's probably a big rustling sound in my earphones now. I've been pulled off. Yeah.
No, it's good. It's good. I think it's sort of the reality, right?
Yes.
In which we're all
working from home,
working through at this moment in time.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you for so generously sharing your thoughts and ideas, and for being here on a Saturday afternoon.
Yes.
I often like these kind of Zoom environments because I imagine myself on a plane ready to take off.
And it's funny, we've all found the same backgrounds to also put in the back, even though we're not in the same place. Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa, for the conversation today as well. Really fun to do.
Great. It's been fun. Yeah. I think we have some closing remarks from my colleague Kai as well. Yeah. So Kai, over to you. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Mustafa, and thank you everyone for joining us for this talk, Wikicliki, Debating in Conversation with Shabbir Hussain Mustafa. We hope you have had a wonderful time. So we do have other programs for the Wikicliki exhibition, such as artist talks and workshops. So do look out for that, and you can go to the SAM website for Wikicliki to sign up for them. Thank you, everyone.